Social media today with tributes today to Dr. King on what would have been his 92nd birthday. His words and wisdom particularly fitting in light of the events over the last year, reminding everyone there is work to come. Still, the 36th annual celebration of service at the state capitol honoring Dr. King went today. His nephew reminded those gathered of one of Dr. King's most enduring gifts to America.
Martin Luther King Jr. taught this country his greatest gift was how to protest nonviolently, how to make change when you're frustrated nonviolently, how to march on the Capitol as he marched on Washington.
Today's ceremony also recognized those who have carried on Dr. King's work, including the presentation of the first ever John Robert Lewis Lifetime Achievement Award.